Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Mark 5, Policy Off Leash. And today's a special episode because I'm joined by my colleague, the Executive Director of the Veterinary Virtual Care Association, or VVCA, Ali McIntyre, and a longtime partner and great friend of mine. And we get to unveil our map. Now, why are we excited about our map? Because we have spent with the Animal Policy Group research team the better part of a month determined to create the most definitive, comprehensive, and accurate state-by-state map of all laws and regulations, including COVID guidances from governors relating to telemedicine or virtual care. And I think we have it. So Ali's going to join me in just a moment now, and we will walk through our map. And what we'd like it to be is a tool that you can use with your team any day, all day, to answer any question about what the status of any activity or proposed activity might be in a given state. So Ali, if you'll join me, we'll start our tour.
Thanks, Mark. It's nice to see you. I'm going to share my screen and Mark will walk us through this beautiful interactive map.
So apologies for the very exciting title of Veterinary Telemedicine Regulatory Map, but titles sometimes are useful if they actually say what you mean, so that's what we mean here. Let's take a look at the left side of the screen as you see it, and you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 categories. And we'll start at the top with no VCPR. We'll go up to the top, and you'll notice it highlights the 2 states, Michigan and Connecticut, and the District of Columbia, or DC, that have no VCPR language whatsoever in their Veterinary Practice Act. Therefore, there's no restriction on telemedicine being tied to the VCPR in those 3 jurisdictions. I'll point out, by the way, on the right-hand side of the screen, out in the Atlantic Ocean, you'll see 9 jurisdictions abbreviated. And just given the scale of a map and the small size of the Northeast states, we've compressed them into little squares. And apologies for that if you live in one of those states, no disrespect intended. I am out west, as is my colleague Ali, and things seem to be a little bigger out here, but we'll be fair as we go through this. Now below the next is absolutely no, in all caps, telemedicine VCPR, and you see a number of states highlighted, including prominently California and Texas and Illinois and Georgia, some of our larger states. These are states highlighted in which the Veterinary Practice Act, and reminder, those are always laws passed by state legislatures, absolutely expressly prohibits the creation of a VCPR through telemedicine or electronic means. Below that is the category that in the very first of these video casts, you recall me talking about, which has some ambiguity, must have, quote, seen or be acquainted with the animal. You'll see a small number of states highlighted, including the state where I live, Arizona. These are states where you must have seen or be acquainted with the animal. We're talking about pets mainly here, to establish the VCPR. And it's an open question that's never been tested, whether that seeing or being acquainted with could be accomplished through telemedicine or some digital tool. And that may be something that gets challenged in the years ahead. Below that is the most common category. You'll see most of the country lit up here. You must have examined or physically examined the animal. And examined clearly is intended by these states to mean basically the pet's in your clinic. It could technically be somewhere else, but most of this occurs in your clinic, and you've held, looked at, touched, seen the animal in person. And that's a great many states, as you'll see. And if you tried to come up with a pattern, Democrat, Republican, or in between, you couldn't come up with one. It's a good mixture of the country. Now, below that is when there's a time limit on how long the VCPR lasts. Put differently, if you've seen a pet or you've met the test for a VCPR, it's good for typically 12 months. And you'd have to then see the pet after that 12 months to have a VCPR in place. During those 12 months, remember, if you do have a VCPR in place, you can use telemedicine all day and all night long. There's no restriction. So we're focused here on that all-important when you've established the VCPR. And in these highlighted states, typically for 12 months, at the 13-month level, you've got to see the pet again on the terms the state's laid out to have a VCPR in place. Below that is a lonely state. Ironically, it's the state where the VCPR is okay, and literally it's okay, which is the initials for Oklahoma. Oklahoma is the one state that has recognized the telemedicine VCPR, joining all 49 of the states that do so on the human side. And I've pointed out before that it's not surprising that occurred in Oklahoma because telemedicine for people began prominently in Oklahoma and Kentucky, in very rural parts of those states where people weren't getting care and they needed telemedicine for their own health. And Oklahoma believes the same thing is true, as does the VVCA, for pets in the rural parts of Oklahoma. The law applies all throughout Oklahoma. Below that is a narrow exception for prescriptions of opioids, where Virginia and New Jersey, in their health codes governing all healthcare practitioners, not limited to veterinarians or animal practitioners, and you can have a VCPR by telemedicine to prescribe an opioid in those two states, Virginia and New Jersey. And then finally, we have below that those states which changed the rules regarding the use of the VCPR because of COVID and still have those regulations or versions of those regulations in place. Now, this is a mixture, by the way, of the 17 states that allow now during COVID the creation of a telemedicine VCPR, and states like California, for instance, that didn't go that far but have other exceptions in place. In the case of California, they extended the 12-month time period for a VCPR to 18 months, as did Minnesota. Now, so that's the basic way you can use the map. If you're just wondering where your state fits, we're going to go there next. And we're going to take my, not native state, I grew up in Oregon. I've also lived in California. Where else have I lived, Allie? Georgia, I've lived in Virginia, and I have lived in Texas. So I'm like a lot of Americans of my generation that roamed around for job purposes. But I'm happily in Paradise Valley, Arizona, right next to Scottsdale. And we're going to use Arizona as a chance to see what else you do with this map. So if you know your state, of course you know where you live, but if you know the state you want to understand, you've clicked on it, as Allie has here, and we go down below and we've put, for each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, details and quoted and replicated exactly the language from the statute. So you can be a lawyer. I welcome you to do that. And you can read how it applies. Now at the top, it reminds you what category of VCPR the state's in. And Arizona's in that, quote, seen or acquainted with the animal at the top. Below that, it tells you that there's been a COVID change. That helps you out because obviously we're still in the COVID era. And you'll see below what those specifics are. Then you go to the VCPR provisions. In every case of every state, and you can check all 50 if you want, in every state, we will show you then exactly the language the statute uses. And it's very legalistic. And the reason it's legalistic is you'll recall, I pointed out in the last video cast, the whole reason VCPR as a term was created was to create a legal framework for the state to discipline or take action against a veterinarian based upon not being in compliance with the state laws. So it's written very much lawyer-like because it serves a lawyer-like purpose in the statute. And this one talks about, let's go down to sub B, the veterinarian has sufficient knowledge of the animal. And then it tells you sufficient knowledge is obtained when the veterinarian has recently seen and is personally acquainted with the keeping and care of the animal. And so, and it does have it also points out for rural practitioners with large animals, you can have the visit to the premises, i.e. to the ranch in Arizona, and also establish the VCPR. So those are the basic rules. Now we keep going below that with Arizona, and we see what they did in the COVID era. And you'll see up top, executive order. An executive order means the governor, who's the executive, obviously, in each state, So it's not something the legislature did. This isn't a change to the law. It's a power granted a governor in emergency circumstances like COVID, or it could be the case in a hurricane or a flood or natural disaster or war and the like. Executive Order 2020-19, headline, Telemedicine for Pets and Animals. And below that it says, quote, telehealth services may be provided by any Arizona licensed veterinarian to establish a valid VCPR. So Arizona made it very clear in the COVID area that you could use telemedicine to set up the VCPR. And then down below, they have further discussion of how that works. But basically, and then even below that, in the bold, you'll see it directs the Veterinary Medical Board that they cannot make telehealth more restrictive or less favorable than in-person consults. Well, this was encouraging to the VVCA and to me, working with the animal policy group based here in Arizona, because it was making it explicit that the governor wanted folks to use telemedicine for treatment of their pets, and boards were not to do anything to make that hard to do or punitive or less favorable, if you were, than if they went in person. So that's Arizona. Now we're going to go back up to the map.
So Mark, let me just intervene real quick, because I
Please.
want the viewers to know that we have all of these linked, so that if someone wants to go and see the original order or the administrative rules, we do link quite a few things in here for more detail.
And let's stay with that point, Ellie. Thanks for making that point. We did this because we want this to be a living, breathing tool for you, not just for sponsors and members of VVCA, but anybody that can access the map. If there's a question in your practice, which often comes up, if there's a question at a conference, you're on a virtual Zoom call, and someone says, this is what the law is in Indiana. If you've got a memory or a sense that it might be different, you can pause the conversation, say, let's take a look at the VVCA map, go to Indiana, go down to this section after you've highlighted it, read it. If people still don't believe you, link and go directly to the full statute and take the time. And if you've enjoyed that process, you might want to go to law school, because that's what we spend most of our time doing for 3 years, becoming lawyers. But we wanted this to be an all-encompassing. You only have to go here if you really need to know what the status is. We're going to look at one more state, and then we'll be finished for this session. And that's California, because for a couple of reasons. It's obviously the largest state, nearly 40 million people now, not quite 10% of the United States. Actually, it's slightly more than that. But California is also a state that has a legislature that likes to legislate, meaning they have a lot of laws pertaining to veterinary medicine. And for many people, they look to what California does either as an example of what they don't want to do in some cases, or what they do want to do. And I will tell you, on the subject of telemedicine, California has not been a terribly friendly state in general, because it's one of those states that spelled out, don't you dare try to start a VCPR through telemedicine. But it has some features that are interesting. And what I want to do is, let's drop down, Allie, into California's text. And I want to go down to the emergency provision, and let's see where here it is. So this is an interesting section, and I want to emphasize two things. This is not this isn't a law that California passed during COVID, but COVID is an emergency. Obviously, we all know that in our own states, but it's emergency in California. And what I've done here is, in bold, I've highlighted to make it really easy to read what this means in an emergency like COVID if you're a California veterinarian. And you'll notice that if you're within 25 miles of an emergency, well, if you live in California, you're in an emergency. And it says under sub 1, if we come down to that, Allie, if you can highlight that so people know what, there it is. It'll say, a veterinarian can render necessary and prompt care and treatment to an animal patient without establishing a veterinary client-patient relationship if conditions are such that one cannot be established in a timely manner. And then down below, it allows you to actually do a prescription. And clearly, if somebody calls your office and says, I don't want to come in, either I can't or I don't because I don't think it's safe, or now increasingly in California, people may just assume they have to stay in their house at all times. The veterinarian can do whatever they want to treat an animal. This is a very broad provision here. They can treat the pet through a video or an electronic conversation. And the only thing you have to do is you need to ask if there's a veterinary client relationship already in place or VCPR in place with some other veterinarian, because if so, you'd want to direct them there. But if you can't connect with that person, or the patient or the owner basically says they don't want to, you can do whatever you need to take care of that pet. And you cannot be sued later because you took advantage of it and had a VCPR via telemedicine. So that's a unique provision in California. I'd love to see every state have that. But it is only written as it is here in California. So let's go back to the map overall, Ali. And again, you go to vvca.org. And when you go to that, like Ali's highlighted maybe that's a bookmark for you. It gets you every time to this map, and you can get your questions answered on any given state. If you go to the About Us link there, Ali, if you can click on that. If you haven't done that, we're a new organization. As you know, we were started at the end of April, and we're not, we're barely 8 months old, but it gives you a chance to see who the board members are. And it's a great mixture of really talented people, present speaker accepted, that are leaders in the profession and are practitioners in many cases of telemedicine, all of whom are happy to talk with you at any given time. But I hope this has been useful. And if you have questions about the map, reach out to Ali and she'll answer them, I'm sure. And good luck in your practices. Thanks. If you want more information or even more fun to engage in an extended conversation with your colleagues about these issues, go to the Veterinary Virtual Care Association or VVCA.org website, where our 3,600 member strong organization is engaging on all topics that concern telemedicine and virtual care for veterinary practices, not just limited to the policies I'm discussing, but how do you use it best? How do you implement it? How do you train your staff? What are the proper roles for all the staff members? And actually, importantly, how pet owners have reacted to it. We'll see you next week. Thanks.